For many men over 50, the day only truly begins after the first cup. The body wakes up, the mind clears, and routine falls into place. Coffee feels like a harmless ally, almost automatic. But what few people realize is that as the years pass, the body starts responding differently to stimuli that once felt neutral. And this change happens quietly without an obvious warning. I am Dr. David Miller, a urologist, and in clinical practice, I see men who still have desire, sexual interest, and even good mental energy, but they report something curious. The body does not respond with the same consistency as before. It is not a lack of desire. It is not simply age. It is physiological adaptation, or the lack of it. After 50, the nervous system and the vascular system become more sensitive to anything that stimulates or constricts. Substances that once simply helped you wake up can now keep the body in a state of alert for too long. That disrupts the natural rhythm between arousal and relaxation, which is essential for predictable sexual response. When the body stays switched on for long periods, blood vessels do not relax as easily when they need to. The main point here is not to demonize common habits, but to understand that the mature body operates under different rules. Circulation is no longer as tolerant of constant stimulation spikes. Sleep becomes decisive for vascular recovery. The balance between activation and rest becomes more fragile. And when that balance breaks, the signs appear where the response needs to be fast, precise, and sustained. What almost no one explains is that certain daily habits do not cause an immediate problem, but they create constant internal noise. That noise does not eliminate desire, but it interferes with the body's response at the exact moment when relaxation matters more than being on alert. That is why many men describe a sense of unpredictability. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not, with no clear pattern. Today, you are going to understand what really happens in the male body when that daily stimulation repeats over the years, not in theory, but in practical physiology. And you will see why small awareness-based changes can restore the body's ability to respond without effort. Before we continue, check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because this kind of explanation does not show up by accident. And now tell me in the comments, right stimulation if you feel your body stays revved up too much, or right fatigue if you notice your energy drops and your response does not match your desire. To understand why coffee can influence sexual response after 50, you have to look beyond the feeling of energy it creates. The first thing caffeine does is not stimulate the brain, it activates the body's alert system. That system was designed for short, occasional situations, not for running continuously every day. When caffeine enters the body, it triggers the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline. These chemicals prepare you for action. They increase focus, speed up the heart, and constrict blood vessels. In a younger man with elastic vessels and fast adaptation, that effect is temporary. The body turns on and turns off easily. After 50, that shutdown becomes less efficient. The problem is not feeling awake. The problem is when the body stays activated longer than it should. Blood vessels that remain constricted for long periods lose flexibility, and less flexible vessels respond worse when they need to relax quickly. Exactly what must happen during an erection. The penis feels this before any other organ because its arteries are small and highly dependent on precise response. If the vessel does not fully relax, blood may still arrive, but it will not enter with enough pressure to sustain rigidity. That is why many men describe unstable erections. It starts, but it does not hold, or it depends too heavily on mental stimulation. Another important point is the cumulative effect. Daily coffee, especially in high doses or later in the day, keeps cortisol elevated throughout the day. High cortisol disrupts deep sleep, and sleep is the primary window for vascular repair. Without proper nightly repair, the endothelium becomes less responsive day after day. A quiet cycle forms. More coffee to compensate for fatigue, more nervous system activation, less recovery, stiffer vessels, and increasingly unpredictable sexual response. None of this happens suddenly. It is gradual, almost invisible, until the moment a man realizes something has changed. It is important to understand. This does not mean coffee is the enemy. It means that after 50, coffee stops being neutral. it begins to have real impact on the balance between stimulation and relaxation, which is the foundation of healthy erectile response. If this explanation is making sense to you, like this video now, that simple action helps this content reach other men who need to understand that many times the problem is not desire, it is the internal state of the body. There is a detail that rarely enters the conversation when we talk about coffee after 50. Timing changes everything. The same cup can produce completely different effects depending on when it enters the body. And this is not opinion, it is biology. In the morning, the body naturally wakes with higher cortisol levels. This hormone helps you wake up, mobilize energy, and begin the day. When coffee enters during this window, it tends to add to a process that is already happening. For many men, this creates focus, drive, and a sense of control. The system turns on, works, and later can turn off. The problem begins when stimulation extends into the afternoon, and especially into the evening. After 50, caffeine metabolism slows down. What used to clear in a few hours can now remain circulating until night. Even without obvious palpitations or visible anxiety, caffeine is still there, keeping the nervous system slightly activated. That subtle activation is enough to interfere with deep sleep. A man may sleep, but he does not recover. And deep sleep is where most vascular repair happens, where hormonal release becomes more balanced, and where the nervous system resets. Without that full process, the body wakes with stiffer vessels and lower responsiveness. Here is the point many men miss. The next day's sexual response begins the night before. When the body does not fully enter recovery mode, it stays in survival mode. And a body in survival mode does not invest energy in functions that require fine relaxation and precise blood flow control. Another effect of late coffee is disruption of internal rhythm. The brain loses clarity about when it should be alert and when it should power down. That internal noise interferes with communication between nerves, blood vessels, and hormones. The result is a less predictable body response, more dependent on mental effort and less automatic. That is why many men report something interesting. On days they sleep better, sexual response feels firmer and calmer. On days with poor sleep, everything feels harder. Coffee, when poorly timed, acts exactly at this invisible point, not blocking desire but sabotaging the recovery that supports response. Understanding this completely changes how you see the daily habit. It is not about removing pleasure, it is about respecting the rhythm of the mature body. When stimulation happens at the right time, it helps. When it invades rest time, it carries a silent cost that shows up exactly where the body needs to function without effort. After 50, the male body loses a skill that once felt automatic, absorbing stimulation without paying a hidden price. That is why the amount of coffee matters as much as timing. What once worked as a boost can become quiet overload. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, the substance that signals fatigue to the brain. In small doses, this creates mental clarity. In excess, the body enters a state of denial of its own limits. The man feels functional, but the nervous system stays activated even when it should slow down. After 50, that prolonged activation carries a vascular cost. Elevated adrenaline keeps vessels slightly constricted throughout the day. That constant constriction reduces the ability to relax deeply and quickly, which is essential for a firm, sustained erection. Another subtle effect of excess caffeine is low-grade anxiety. It is not obvious panic or intense nervousness. It is a quiet internal restlessness. The body becomes more tense, breathing becomes shallower, and the system shifts into control mode. This mental and physical state does not match sexual relaxation. Even without realizing it, the internal environment becomes less favorable for spontaneous response. There is also a metabolic impact. High doses of coffee, especially on an empty stomach or spread across the day, keep cortisol elevated in a persistent way. High cortisol interferes with the production and effective use of functional testosterone. It does not necessarily cause a sudden drop in desire, but it changes the quality of the body's response to stimulation. A crucial point is that excess creates tolerance. The man needs more coffee to feel the same initial effect. That keeps the body in a cycle of continuous stimulation, with no real periods of shutdown. And without shutdown, there is no repair. Without repair, blood vessels lose flexibility. That is why many men say, coffee does not give me the same energy anymore, but without it, I feel worse. This is not only psychological dependence, it is a nervous system that has forgotten how to regulate its own rhythm. At a certain point, coffee stops being a tool and becomes a crutch. It keeps daily functioning going but blocks deep recovery. And a body that does not fully recover begins to fail first in the functions that require precision, calm, and efficient circulation. Understanding that limit is not giving up pleasure, it is respecting the physiology of the mature body. When the dose is appropriate, coffee stimulates without trapping you. When it passes that point, it steals from the body what it most needs to respond naturally. There is a major difference between drinking coffee by itself and drinking coffee inside a specific metabolic context. After 50, that difference stops being a small detail and becomes decisive. Coffee does not enter the body alone. It meets a biochemical environment that can amplify its effects or completely neutralize them. When coffee is consumed on an empty stomach, especially right after waking, it meets a body that is still adjusting hormone levels. Caffeine enters and rapidly increases cortisol, the alert hormone. In some men, this creates focus. In others, it creates a spike followed by a crash, with irritability, early fatigue, and physical tension. This up and down pattern is not neutral for blood vessels. Now notice what happens when coffee is combined with sugar. Blood glucose rises quickly, insulin activates, and the body shifts priorities. The vascular system becomes temporarily more rigid. The endothelium suffers oxidative stress, and the internal environment becomes more inflammatory. Not dramatic in one day, but when repeated daily, it creates hostile conditions for peripheral circulation, including penile circulation. Even artificial sweeteners can interfere. They confuse the nervous system, alter insulin signaling, and keep the body in a state of metabolic vigilance. The body shifts into control mode, not relaxation mode, and relaxation is the base of healthy sexual response. On the other hand, when coffee is consumed with the right foods, proteins, fiber, or small amounts of fat, the impact changes. Caffeine absorption slows down, the hormonal peak becomes softer, and the nervous system reacts more steadily. Stimulation stops being a shock and becomes a moderate signal. This explains why two men can drink the same amount of coffee and experience completely different effects. It is not only the coffee, it is the internal scenario it enters. A body that is inflamed, sleep-deprived, and overloaded responds with rigidity. A more stable body responds with clarity and then can power down. Another overlooked point is that coffee paired with very heavy meals creates internal competition. Blood is redirected to digestion, the nervous system stays activated, and peripheral circulation loses priority. Repeating this pattern throughout the day contributes to a body that functions but does not recover. In the end, coffee acts like an amplifier. It does not create the problem by itself, but it exposes the real state of metabolism. When the internal environment is disorganized, it worsens things. When the environment is balanced, it simply follows along. That is why after 50, the question is not only how much coffee do I drink? The real question is, what condition is my body in when I drink it? Because that answer determines whether stimulation helps, or charges a silent price that shows up exactly where the body needs to be most precise. By now, it is clear that coffee is not automatically a villain. But there is a group of men who need extra caution after 50. Ignoring this does not create an immediate effect, but it builds tension in the system over time. And the body always collects that cost in some way. Men with high baseline anxiety often feel it first. Not obvious anxiety with racing heart, but constant internal alertness that never fully turns off. In that scenario, caffeine does not wake the body up. It keeps the body on watch. Blood vessels stay constricted, breathing becomes shorter, and deep relaxation becomes difficult. That internal environment is incompatible with spontaneous sexual response. Another sensitive group is men with high or unstable blood pressure. Caffeine can cause temporary pressure spikes and vascular rigidity. In younger bodies, this is quickly compensated. After 50, compensation is slower. The result is not collapse, but less flexible circulation throughout the day. Exactly the opposite of what the penis needs for predictable response. Men with sleep disorders also belong on this list. Coffee may not prevent sleep, but it fragments sleep stages. The man sleeps but does not enter the deeper repair cycles. Without that repair, the endothelium, the inner lining of vessels, loses efficiency. That directly affects arterial relaxation the next day. There are also men who use medications that stimulate the nervous system, manage blood pressure, treat arrhythmias, or regulate mood. Coffee interaction is not always obvious, but it can alter heart rhythm, blood pressure, and vascular response. The body receives conflicting signals, and when signals clash, the response becomes unstable. Another overlooked warning sign is fatigue that does not improve with more coffee. When a man increases the dose and feels only a short activation followed by a crash, it indicates the system is already overloaded. At that stage, coffee does not solve the issue, and it masks it briefly. It is important to understand that erections function as an early marker of internal balance. When erections become unpredictable, it often reflects a tired nervous system, stiff vessels, and insufficient recovery. It is not an isolated failure, it is a signal. For these men, insisting on the habit without adjustment does not mean enjoying a daily pleasure. It means keeping the body in continuous tension, where stimulation replaces recovery. And a body that does not fully recover starts failing first in the functions that require precision, calm, and fine coordination. Recognizing these signs is not about giving up coffee. It is about understanding when the body is asking for more rest than stimulation, and learning to listen before the silent response becomes a problem that is hard to ignore. When coffee is used with awareness, something interesting happens. It stops controlling the body's rhythm and returns to being a tool. The man no longer depends on it to function. He chooses when and how to stimulate the system, and that changes how the body responds throughout the day. Sexual response is one of the first signs of that change. Not because coffee creates performance, but because the body stops living in a constant state of alert. When the nervous system relearns how to turn off, blood vessels regain the ability to relax. Circulation flows with less resistance, and penile response returns as a consequence, not as effort. Many men report that after adjusting timing, dose, and context, predictability returns. The body responds better when it should. Sleep deepens. Morning energy becomes more stable. The need for constant stimulation decreases, and along with that, performance anxiety fades, almost without being noticed. Another important point is the shift in how a man relates to his own body. He stops monitoring himself all the time. There is no more testing, comparing, or silent pressure. Touch stops feeling like an exam. Intimacy becomes presence, not expectation. That mental state is only possible when the body is balanced internally. Managing how you consume coffee after 50 is not giving up pleasure. It is protecting the foundation of vascular health, nervous system stability, and sexual longevity. Small adjustments done consistently produce effects that no immediate stimulant can deliver. In this context, erections stop being an isolated problem and become an honest reflection of a body that functions better as a whole. When balance returns, confidence follows, not because of promises, but because of physiological coherence. If this content brought clarity to you, subscribe to the channel now to keep receiving direct explanations based on real biology without sensationalism. Like this video, it helps the channel grow and reach other men who need this information. And watch the other videos on the channel where we go deeper into topics directly connected to everything you heard here. I will end here. Take care of your rhythm, respect your body's signals, and I will see you in the next video.